U.S. media outlets are reporting that American NAFTA negotiators might be nearing a deal with their Mexican counterparts. The two countries have been holding bilateral talks to work out their differences, including on agriculture and the auto sector. But it's not the first time we're hearing reports of a looming agreement. And just yesterday, President Trump said he was in, quote, no rush to get a deal. So what does this mean for Canadian negotiators kind of waiting on the sidelines? And should we really expect the talks to go more smoothly? We're back with the Power Panel. Jen Gerson in Calgary, Marty Patriquin in Montreal, and our resident NAFTA expert, Katie Simpson, here in studio, without her mug, but with all of your knowledge. So, Katie, update us to begin on where things stand. Please recap.
So the Mexicans and the Americans have been having bilateral meetings for the past few weeks in Washington. Canada has not been invited to go and take part in that. What Canadian officials are saying to reporters is that they're very comfortable with that. They support the American position because the Americans and the Mexicans are hashing out all of the details around rules for the auto sector. Canada and the U.S. are on the same page. They want Mexico to improve labor standards and make changes to the way that, well, basically their economy is going to function. So it's Mexico really making concessions at this point, or that's what the Americans are trying to make happen. Once the U.S. and Mexico work out that bilateral part of the agreement, what is expected to happen is that Canada will rejoin those negotiations. This afternoon at 5 p.m., an email release came out from Chrystia Freeland's office. There's nothing like a Friday 5 p.m. news release that said Chrystia Freeland held a phone call today with her NAFTA council and then another phone call with provincial and territorial, her counterparts, giving an update on where things are. So feelers are out to try and get a sense of what was said on that call. But what we've been hearing throughout this week is that Canada is waiting for Mexico and the U.S. to hash out their bilateral issues, whether it's on things like agriculture, but mostly the auto sector. Once that's hashed out, Canada will come in and there will be an urgent push to try and get a deal in the next couple of weeks. We've seen urgent pushes before to try and meet artificial deadlines, but they want to get something done before Peña Nieto is out of office. And so they've got to get something done now, or it's going to drag into the next Mexican president.
Marty, on the issue of urgency, yesterday, Lighthizer said he was hopeful a breakthrough could happen in the next several days, and then Mr. Trump interrupted him to say there was no rush to get a deal.
That's the thing that's been going on time and time again when it comes to anything that has to do with Mr. Trump. He comes out and says whatever he wants to say. For example, he didn't, Katie said was very, very, prosaic in what she just said. It's exactly what the situation is on the ground. Mr. Trump spun it a different way. He spun it with it sort of saying, excluding Canada was a way of punishing Canada because of where our tariffs are too high and that kind of thing. So this is the modus operandi of this government. Trump says something, screams it out loud, and then Lighthizer and his counterparts, Freeland, et cetera, have to sort of come in and say, look, we know what that guy's saying. Now this is what's really the facts on the ground. That's basically it. One of the problems with punditry in the age of Trump is sort of trying to divine when exactly his words and there'll be consequences to what he says. I have bad news. I'm not going to be able to do anything without it because I'm about a 0 for 100. That said,
join the club.
Yeah, we're probably about 0 for 300. Anyway. That farm aid package that he gave out a few weeks ago, $12 billion to U.S. farmers, really spoke volumes to me as far as NAFTA was concerned, because he realizes, like everybody else, that farmers like NAFTA. And farmers happen to like Trump, or used to. The problem with that $12 billion for these farmers, as far as the stuff that I've been reading, was basically that $12 billion doesn't really make farmers whole. It gives them about 80 cents on the dollar to what they're missing out on because of the countervailing tariffs from China. So that they're very, very uneasy with this kind of thing. And so couple that with the 8 million jobs that are coupled directly with NAFTA in the United States, and those are consequences waiting to happen.
I should have mentioned that when I referenced Lighthizer, that's Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative, kind of leading the charge for the Americans. Jen, we spoke with Raymond Bachand, who's Quebec's NAFTA negotiator, earlier this week, and he seemed to say there is no timeline. Essentially, it's just if there's something done on auto with the U.S. in the next few weeks, then Canada will come back in, but that could take a long time. Does it look like this could go well into 2019?
Oh yeah, I mean, if I were to put money on absolutely anything with regards to the Trump administration, it's that nothing's going to get done before 2019. It is impossible at this point for them to ratify a deal before the midterms. And I think right now a lot of Republicans are much more focused on their current primary races and the next midterm cycle, which is now rapidly, I think, 80 days upon us. And B, I think that there's a hope against hope that the tariffs and the trade fights that the president is getting himself into are not going to hit the American consumer before those midterms. So that is the primary overwhelming concern of, I think, the Republican political class right now. It's not getting a deal done because it literally can't get done. I mean, I think that any deal that they get still needs to be judged by certain congressional committees for like 120 days, and we're now 80 days from the midterms. So like it won't get done for the midterms, so therefore there is no rush. There's no reason why it can't get done until next year. And then the other sort of weird quasi-deadline is, of course, the president-elect of Mexico, whose name I'm not going to try and mispronounce, but is known by Mr. Obrador and also known by the acronym AMLO. He doesn't actually get sworn in until December, and so until he comes into power, that's going to be very, very interesting. But it can't get done. It really can't. So, watch me be wrong, and Marty's quite correct. Watch a deal come forward in 3 days, and someone's going to take this little gift and be like, Jen Gerson is wrong. But no, I think this is going nowhere quickly and won't before 2019.
Can the U.S. and Mexico arrive at some sort of deal, given what Jen just mentioned about AMLO not getting sworn in until December?
It totally is going to depend on what is happening sort of in the next week or so. So the talks wrapped up today, and when the Mexican officials exited the USTR building in Washington, where all these talks are taking place, sort of the questions to those officials were, okay, when is Canada going to get back on the table? Are you sort of satisfied with where you are so far? And the sort of suggestion was that they have made enough progress to perhaps Canada could join next week. But I want to say that we've been saying Canada could rejoin the talks since the last week of July, the first week of August, the second week of August. So we keep hearing this, and we heard this in the same run up to May when they were trying to get something done so that they could have it ratified before that the American Congress could pass it before the midterm elections. We saw that push in May when Trudeau tried to make that final push with Trump to try and get it to that final spot. So the American officials and the Mexican officials have very publicly said, if all three sides want to get it to where it needs to be, it can be done. But it's going to depend on the Americans. If the Americans are not going to drop things like the sunset clause and not include something like a dispute resolution like Chapter 19 or something along those lines, both Canada and Mexico are not going to get on board. So while they're working out all this tension around the auto sector, which we have to remember, when Donald Trump rails on NAFTA, what's he railing on? He's railing on Mexico, and he's railing on all of the American factories that have shut down and have set up shop in Mexico and taken those jobs away. So his number one goal out of these negotiations is to get more jobs back in the U.S. Whether he can actually do that at this stage in the game, because given the way that technology has changed how factories operate, given how jobs have already been established in Mexico, whether he's able to bring those jobs back, that is really questionable. But if he can get something on paper that says, they're improving labor standards in Mexico, it's going to make it less attractive to set up shop in Mexico. And that will be the goal.
I would also add that he probably has a better chance of doing that under AMLO than he previously would, because AMLO is sort of a left-wing populist, Trumpian type figure of his own. We've seen that Donald Trump seems to gravitate towards strongmen figures and seems to have a better personal connection with them. No comment further needed. But and also AMLO has championed higher wages and better standards for his own people. So I actually think that Trump has a vested interest in avoiding continuing these debates under NAFTA and continuing and moving forward once AMLO is put into power in December.
Okay, Marty, we've got 10 seconds. Final word to you.
Trump had a point on that. NAFTA was supposed to raise wages in Mexico, and they did not, and that's the one thing that I think was good going after.
Okay, thanks very much to the Power Panel, Katie Simpson, Jen Gerson, and Marty Patriquin.